Have I ever read the Bible?
No.
I haven't read the Bible.
For my own reasons, no.
I've skimmed it.
I have read the Bible.
I kind of looked at little segments, but I've never actually attempted to read the whole thing.
It's not advertised enough. Like, I don't go to church, so the time when I do read it is when I'm in church. But other than that, I don't have a copy of the Bible. Yeah.
They're interesting stories, like as a guide for people how to live, not necessarily taken literally.
I thought it was daunting.
It's been a long time, so I don't really remember everything.
Story of Adam and Eve.
Yeah, Adam and Eve.
Like stories about Jesus and his life.
Up there, of course, there's Genesis.
I don't know the difference between sort of like the different books and stuff, but I do know Genesis is the first one. Or is that an argument? I don't know.
Like those guys on the Vox Pops there, what goes through your mind when you're given a Bible, or you see a Bible, or you hear a Bible read, or something like that? Is it something like it's a bit outdated? It's a bit irrelevant to me. It's full of contradictions. It's full of weird stuff and names that I can't pronounce. It's a rule book full of restrictions. Or something like, what the heck has that got to do with me in the 21st century where I'm living in central London? Well, most of those things, if not all of them, and some more, is exactly what I thought for almost 38, nearly 39 years of my life. I first encountered the Bible when I was in a Crown courtroom in Manchester, and I had to place my hand on top of it and say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Shortly after those few sentences, I was given a prison sentence, and I was sent to prison in between Manchester and Liverpool, a prison called Risley. I was born into a very dysfunctional family, the Cowley family. Both my parents were alcoholics. My father was from Toxteth in Liverpool. My mother was from Birkenhead in Cheshire, and I was born in Salford in Manchester. No siblings, so a very tight sort of family. My father, unashamedly, was my hero. He was very big and unpredictable, and my dad was about 6'3" in his prime, and my mum was about 5 foot, and she was sort of volcanic. My father was very violent. I grew up seeing my father knock the living daylights out of most people around the area where we lived. And my mum was just as violent, but not in a physical sense, more in a verbal sense. She could cut people to pieces in seconds. So together, it was quite a volatile family to grow up in. We lived in Manchester on some pretty rough estates. And I remember as a kid moving quite a few times. So my childhood, not as bad as some people's, but not a great time for me. But I guess having two alcoholic parents, if you've experienced that, will knock most things out of you. And a lot of things it knocked out of me was certainly any trust I might have had, and certainly any hope. At 15 and a half, 16, two things happened to me really almost together. I got in an argument with my father. My mum and dad used to argue every Sunday over drink or debt or womanizing, what my dad was doing, or a combination of all of them. And I got in the middle of this argument, and my father was about to backhand my mother, and I got in the middle of it, and I got that slap, and there was a big row, and my father told me to get out. He threw me out of the house, and in my arrogance and youth, I took off. At the same time, or shortly after that, I was expelled from the school I was going to. I was bullied immensely at the school, if you've ever experienced that, and I hated it. So I ended up being expelled for truancy. So I was homeless for a while, not long, but I know what it is to be homeless. I moved into a squat with a group of men and women who started to look after me a little bit, which they did, but led me into all different sort of areas of life that I wasn't familiar with. And one of those was crime. They helped me sort of progress in that sort of field. It was petty theft at first from shops, and then it was from houses, and then it was factories, and then warehouses. And what we do is we collect all the stuff that we stole, we bring it back into the house, it would be pooled and sold, and then we'd get some money divvied up between us. And over the next few years, that's what happened to me. And that led me into a relationship with the police. It led me into fines, magistrates' court, bound over to keep the peace, probation, and eventually, like I mentioned, I got a prison sentence. I came out of prison and headed home. I wanted to see my mum and dad. They didn't come to visit me while I was in this Borstal detention centre called Risley. And when I got home to where I left, a stranger opened the door when I knocked. And actually what I found out is that mum and dad had left. They'd got divorced. My father had gone off to Liverpool and my mother off to Birkenhead, and I didn't see them for a very long time. I tried to get my act together. I didn't want to go to prison. It frightened the life out of me, that time I spent in prison. And I got myself a job, working during the day, driving a truck, and working in a bar at night. I got myself a bedsit, just a room in a place called Didsbury in Manchester, and I was holding down these jobs and trying to stay out of trouble. And when I was driving one morning in the centre of Manchester, I saw a poster for the army, and it was a great recruiting poster. It was two soldiers. They were in camouflage uniform. There was a backdrop of mountains with snow on the top. It was blue skies, it was sunny, and they were skiing. And it said underneath, "Do you want a life of adventure? Then join the army." And that was enough for me. I went in, and after some persuasion on my part and quite a few interviews, I was finally given the opportunity to enlist into the British Army. And it was a great day. That was my second encounter with the Bible. The first was the Crown Court in Manchester. The second was the Army Careers Office in Manchester. And it was a Bible. It was this Bible, and I had to lay my hand on it. I had to swear allegiance to the Crown. I got a day's pay. I was given my marching orders, enlistment orders, and I was sent off, and my army career began. And this Bible was given to me, it says, on the 15th of January 1976. And it says this book was used in the enlistment ceremony of Paul Cowley on enlistment into the army at Manchester, 15th of the 1st, 76. It is presented on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen for personal use as a source of spiritual and moral guidance during his army service. At 21, when I joined the army, I was posted straight away out to Germany. I got married straight away because I had to. I couldn't take my girlfriend with me, so we got married and we got a quarter in Germany. At 22, my son was born, Clinton. At 25, I couldn't really handle the responsibility of being a father and trying to be a sort of a husband and hold all that stuff together. So I ended up getting divorced. I sent my son and wife packing back to England. And I didn't see Clinton, my son, for over 10 years. I'd see him on and off, but actually I couldn't really handle that responsibility. He would burst into tears when I dropped him off at his mum's, and I couldn't handle it. So it was about 10 years. At 27, I didn't like being on my own, so I got married again. Then at 28 and a half, nearly 29, another divorce. That was my life. Really, it was full of drink, it was full of debt, it was full of divorce. And mostly, looking back, it was full of despair. I had no idea what I was doing. The only stable thing I had really in my life was my army career, and I loved it. And for the next 16 and a half, nearly 17 years, I did everything that the army threw at me. I volunteered for everything. I did all the courses. I did 3 tours of Northern Ireland. I volunteered for the Falklands. I was in 4 different regiments. And my last 4 years in the army, I transferred into the Army Physical Training Corps. I became a PE teacher, an adventure trainer, really. The army absolutely, physically saved my life. It rescued me, it picked me up, it fed me, it watered me, it gave me a uniform, gave me a sense of responsibility, gave me some character, taught me that I was fit and helped me. But actually, what it didn't do is help me anyway morally or spiritually. In fact, in those 2 areas, I was completely bankrupt. I left the army and started work in the fitness industry. I was well qualified for that. I became a personal trainer here in London. Then I ran a couple of health clubs here in London. Fantastic jobs. Great money, well paid. But actually never really satisfied. Always looking for the next thing. Maybe you've experienced that. Always wanting something else. And a few years ago, I walked in through those doors that you came in through tonight to start an Alpha course. Why? I had absolutely no idea. A friend of mine recommended me to it, and I thought, I've done so many courses in the army, I'll do a course on God, and that will shut him up, and it will get him off my back. I struggled with some bits of the course, maybe you have, but it was on the weekend, which the guys talked about, that is coming up. that something really happened to me. It was there in a slightly depressing seaside resort that I met with God. And actually it was raining. It wasn't always sunny. And it was there that I met with God. And it was a real shock, a bit of a shock. Probably for both of us, actually, because I didn't actually think God would want anyone like me. I've shared some stuff with you. I'm not going to share everything. I'd be too embarrassed. But I know me very well. And I found out on that weekend that God loved me. He loved me absolutely, without any precedent, without anything, unconditionally, he loved me. And that was a big shock for me. It was a real big deal that he would take me on with my background and my state of mind. And that when I was told that he loved me just unconditionally, it was a massive deal for me. And since that weekend, my life started to change. Slowly, some of my fears started to disappear, and my life just started to take a different direction. I married my girlfriend after 8 years of living together. Amanda had never been married, but I'm not great marriage material, but I felt God say, come on, we can do this together. I got my relationship back with my son, Clinton. He's now 36, and I see him. He stays with us 3 days a week, and we have an amazingly close relationship, which I thought I would never have back ever again. I have a daughter, Phoebe, who's gorgeous and 18 and is still my baby girl, and she teaches me lots of things, especially at the moment about spending money. And I'm doing what I believe God has called me to do. Some of the work that Toby mentioned, working with prisons, working with ex-offenders, working with addicts, people with mental health issues. Just the people that when I read the Bible that he seemed to hang around with quite a lot. And that's the area that he's put me into. And also in 2002, after 3 years of theology training, I was ordained into the Church of England as a priest and came back here walking through those doors again. How did all that change happen that I've just done really quickly? It started for me when I decided to listen. I decided to pay attention to someone else except me, when I would take some guidance, and I would start to read this book that you've got in the back of those seats, the Bible. And for me, they were both very humbling experiences, listening to advice and trying to read something like this. But I found some things out about the Bible that I didn't know. I found out that it's an amazingly popular book. It's the most successful book of all time. I didn't know that. Over 5 billion Bibles have been printed. Every year, over 100 million Bibles are sold or given away. It's the bestseller every single year. I didn't know that. I also found out that it's a powerful book. One former prime minister described this book, the Bible, as highly explosive. I found out that it has an impact on people who read it. I work in prisons, and one friend of mine, Mark, who was in Dartmoor prison, we were doing an Alpha course down there, and I went back to his cell, and he told me he slept on his Bible, and he would put his head on it. And I said, goodness me, that must be uncomfortable. He said, I just want all this stuff to go in, and if I sleep on it, then it's probably going to go in. And it did. I found out that it's a precious book as well. At her coronation, the Queen was presented with a copy of the Bible, and these words were said over her. We present you with this book, the most valuable thing this world affords. The book itself is only a means to an end. It's just pages with words written on them. And that's why for years I carried this around and I've still got it. Why? I have no idea. You know, the amount of times I've moved around in all those years and I've still got it. And the reason I carried it, I'd like to say, like it says in the front, for spiritual and moral guidance, but it wasn't. I carried it around all those years and through Ireland and the Falklands because I heard a story about a young Tommy, a young soldier in the First World War. As he was going over the trenches, he put his Bible in his top breast pocket, and as he went over, a bullet hit the Bible, and the bullet stuck in the Bible, and it didn't go into his body, and it saved his life. So I thought, I'll just keep it in there, just in case. You never quite know. And that's why I carried it around for years, not for any spiritual guidance. I tried to read it so many times. I tried to read it in Northern Ireland when I was scared on various tours. I tried to read it down in the Falklands when I was on my own. And I couldn't understand a word it was trying to say to me. It was just a mixture of words on a page. And that's because now I realize I didn't have a relationship with the author. I had no relationship with him who'd put it together. Why? Because nobody had told me about him for 39 years of my life. I found out that it's a book that's inspired. Jesus says in the scriptures, people do not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. That's the written word of God, that Jesus. And material things don't satisfy. I'm sure you know that as well. Goodness, I've tried lots of stuff. I've stuffed my life with so many things. It's embarrassing. Even the best human relationships don't ultimately satisfy. And sadly, I've tried quite a few of those as well. Why? Because there's a spiritual hunger, I believe, in all of us. It's a longing for God. It may manifest itself in many different ways. But it's in every human heart that we have this need for a relationship with the Creator. Or in other words, with someone bigger than ourselves, someone we can go to. God's longing to communicate with us, to be in a relationship with us. And again, I didn't know that. And the primary way that God speaks to us is through this book, is the Bible. That's his written word, how he speaks to us. St. Paul puts it like this: all scripture is inspired by God. But what does that mean, to be inspired by God? Well, when you read it, and I'm sure some of you have, or you've tried it, or you've heard it, it kind of has a ring of truth to it. Even if we don't want to admit it to ourselves, when you read it, it has this ring of truth. It proves to be inspired when you read it and you put it into practice. When you start to try and do some of the things that it advises you to do, you start to find out that actually that stuff works. It is inspired. I learned about the Bible on the Alpha course, what you're on now. It's there that through this talk that I started to understand what it's trying to say to me. It became personal to me. And I found out that God had a plan for my life and still has a plan for each and every one of us. When I felt first called to prison work, I was really confused. You know, for most of my life, I'd tried to stay out of it. Then all of a sudden, I found myself in it every day, visiting and volunteering. And it was really quite scary at times. And then reading the Bible one day, I came across a piece of scripture that I didn't know was in there. It's in the Old Testament. And it's in Jeremiah, and it's chapter 29, and it's verse 11 through to 13. But basically what it says is that, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And I really liked those words. I like plans. And I thought maybe prison was my plan. Maybe prison was my destiny. It spoke to me. It was personal. The Bible's made up of the Old Testament, which is the history of the Jewish people. That's the first part of it. And the second part is about Jesus and about the early church, what we're in now, the church. It was written over a period of 1,600 years by many individuals. I think over 40 people put this book together. Kings, scholars, philosophers, fishermen, poets, statesmen, historians, doctors, and they wrote different types of literature, such as history, poetry, philosophy, prophecy, and letters. It's all in there, all different times. So it's 100% the work of human beings. But what the writer is saying to us is that it's 100% inspired by God. Let me give you an example. Sir Christopher Wren, the greatest English architect of all time, built and is known for building St. Paul's Cathedral, that great cathedral not too far from here. But they actually didn't lay one single stone. Other people put the stones together. There was carpenters, there was glaziers, there was all sorts of people who put that together. He didn't do anything. Many different builders were involved over many years. But there was one mind, one architect, one vision, and one inspiration. And that was him. He was the one behind it. And it's the same with the Bible. Many different writers, many different ways of writing, but one architect, one vision, one inspiration behind all of it. God himself. It can also be a difficult read if you've ever tried to read it, particularly parts of the Old Testament. You find there some moral difficulties which are hard to understand at times. There are very different kinds of writing in the Bible. Some lean towards the metaphorical. Some are heavy with imagery. Some are really deeply poetic, like the Song of Songs. And you have to read it carefully. You can't just flick through it really quickly. You have to savor it at times. But even after that, we're left with some things that are still difficult in the Bible to understand. And there's no way of dodging that. They are difficult things to understand. Like it's difficult to believe that God is a God of love, yet God can allow all the suffering that we see in our world. That's really hard work to put those two things together. And understandably, some people reject the Christian faith on that bias. And I can understand why. But what I found is, if you persevere, I found the more you try to wrestle with these two big areas, the love of God and the suffering that we see in the world, there are no easy answers. But the more we explore and the more we wrestle, in my experience, the greater our understanding of suffering comes, and the greater our understanding that the love that God has for us becomes deeper. But you have to try that yourself. Try and view the Bible as inspired by God, and then wrestle with the difficulties of mankind. Don't be scared about them. Ask, dive in, look at them, try and understand them, tackle them. As I'm getting older, I'm ashamed to say I'm starting to really like crosswords. I know they're really boring, but I'm starting to like them. And not that I can finish them, but I really like them. And what I thought of the analogy is, it's like a crossword. If you're doing a crossword and you can't get one word, you don't bin the crossword. What you do is you move on to another clue. And that clue will give you maybe a word. And then that word will link into another word. And then you can find another word. It's a little bit like the Bible. As you go through it, it starts to, I think the lady at the beginning said, it's like a puzzle. The bits start to drop in. And eventually, hopefully, you finish the crossword. Not that I've ever done that. The Bible is a very practical book as well. And you'll find this as you wrestle with it. The Bible just isn't an inspired book. It's a practical book. It's been described as a manual for life with practical wisdom on leading a healthy life and fulfilling life. And it says in there somewhere, I can't quite remember, but if you go by the Bible, if you try and read it and you understand it, there's a lovely line where it says your life will be like a well-watered garden. And I love that imagery. I want my life to be a well-watered garden, flourishing and growing and healthy. Now, some people say, look, I don't want a rule book. I don't want all these regulations. It's boring. It's stopping me having fun. There's no freedom in it. I can't do what I want to do. If you follow that, goodness me, you're going to lose all your freedom and joy and everything. Well, I would question that and say, do you? Or do you gain it back? Do you actually get freedom by working through the Bible? I'm not a massive football fan, but I live near Stamford Bridge, so I can't really get away from it. And it's crazy on match day, but football is known as the beautiful game. But imagine a football match without any white lines, without any corner flags, without any referees, without any linesmen, without a centre spot, without a penalty spot, without a goalkeeper. It would be complete chaos. They'd be killing each other. Well, they sometimes do with all that anyway. But it would be chaos without those boundaries. And God has given us guidelines that I didn't know about, how to live by. Not because he wants to spoil our fun. It's because he loves us and he wants our life to be like well-watered gardens, that they flourish and they're full of stuff and it's exciting. I've tried life without guidelines. I've tried ignoring the rules for 40 years of my life. And you know what? To be honest, I really like boundaries. I really like guidelines and sidelines and corner posts and where I'm supposed to go and know how far I can go. My life has been a lot easier from the day I met him. So it's inspired by God. It's God-breathed. It has the power to change people's lives, or I and many people in here wouldn't be here tonight. It's changed mine. And the exciting part is God is still changing lives now He can change your life tonight if you want it changed. He's still speaking to us tonight if you allow him. So God speaks to us through the Bible. And the Bible's like a love letter. When you get letters from someone you love, you treasure them. Not because of the letter itself, it's because you know who wrote the letter that you're receiving. You love them, so you cherish the letter. And it's the same with the Bible. Me and Amanda, when we were boyfriend and girlfriend, we lived apart. I was stationed in Gibraltar in the army. For nearly 3.5 years, we had this long-term relationship. And what we would do is send letters to one another. And I've kept most of them, and so has Amanda. And these are military ones. They're called blueies that you would send free post. And we'd send letters. And when they would arrive, or when I would get one, I would get excited when I went to the mailbox to see it there, because I knew who the author was. I was excited because I knew who'd written it, not because of the letter. And then I moved on from letters because I got bored with writing, and we did little tapes. We used to send tapes to one another, and I'd get a tape in an envelope, and I'd play it, and I'd listen to it. And it'd be really exciting because I'd be close to Amanda again. It's a love letter. I got some of these letters once when Phoebe was a bit younger, and I read discreetly some of them to her. And I wanted to teach her the element of romance, and halfway through one of them, she put her fingers in her ear and said, "Daddy, Daddy, stop, it's making me feel sick." Well, I was trying to give her the inspiration about letters and romance and stuff like that. So they're love letters. And it's because you know the author, you want to read the Bible. Because it's all about relationship. It's all about relationship. Otherwise, it's just a book with words. And those letters that I mentioned were really important to me. And the whole point of that book, the whole point of the Bible, is to develop a relationship with the author, God, and his Son, Jesus Christ, as he speaks to us. And that is how faith comes. Romans 10, verse 17. It says faith comes through hearing the word of God. As you read it, it goes in. So if you want to grow in faith, all I can do is encourage you to try to start to read this book. Maybe start with the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. They're great. They're full of stories. They're brilliant. And as Martin Luther said, the Bible is alive. It speaks to me. It has feet. It runs after me. It has hands. It lays hold of me. It embraces you and helps you with your life. So how and when should we read it? Anytime you want. Anywhere you want. There's no rules or regulations for that at all. You don't have to be in a particular place. You don't have to have a particular time unless you want to do that. You don't have to be in church. You don't have to be in the right sort of stuff. You don't have to have a suit on. Anything. Do whatever you want to do. I'm hopeless at trying to set a time and a place. I try to have a time and a certain area and a time of the day, but I fail. And then I constantly feel bad. And I constantly beat myself up. So what I've decided to do is try and read a little bit every day, if I can, when I can. And I kind of made this little deal with God, my partnership with him. My part of the deal is I have to find the time to open it. And his part of the deal is he has to help me read it. And we're doing quite good with that partnership at the moment. Try and have a plan if you can, because goodness, time is precious. You're all really busy people, but find a time. I'd say maybe 5 minutes a day. Find a place where you're comfortable. It could be on the bus, the train, the tube, the bedroom, whatever, in the park, the garden, walking, headphones, wherever it is. And find a pattern. Ask God to help you read it. He wants to be in a relationship with you. So as soon as you ask him, he goes, "Of course, let's read it together. Come on, it's really exciting stuff." The Bible in 1 Year app, which the guys told you about, you can download it for free. Put it on your phone. It's been really helpful to me, that app. It's been fantastic, actually. You know, I try and read a passage where Nikki does a commentary. Then there's a New Testament passage, an Old Testament passage. And it's really good. And if I'm really pushed, I might just read the story that Nikki says at the beginning because they're brilliant. And I might just jump to Pippa Adds at the bottom. She's got a couple of one-liners, which are usually very funny and brilliant. Or you can listen to Nikki's voice, as we heard, reading the Bible I have it at night. It's fantastic for getting me off to sleep. It's brilliant. Sorry, Nikki. But you know what? I wouldn't worry if you don't understand all of it either. Don't panic about it. Like the crossword. Just have a crack. Just try and do it. And the main question to ask is, what is God trying to say to me? And how can I put what he's trying to say into practice in my life today, now, where I am? And the great thing is, you start tomorrow and you start to read it every day. In a year, you'd have gone through the complete Bible, all of it, in a year. And if you use the app, it's even easier. And don't worry if it takes you longer than a year. I'm up to 5 years and I'm only about halfway through it at the moment. So don't worry. Don't set yourself unrealistic targets where you just beat yourself up. I'm saying to you, give yourself 5 minutes. 2.5 minutes for a quick prayer. God, help me read the Bible. 2.5 minutes opening it and trying to look at one of the Gospels or one of the Scriptures. Then close it up and put it away again. And maybe try the same thing tomorrow. However you do it, what I've found personally is the more you pray, 2.5 minutes, the more you read the Bible, 2.5 minutes, it starts to get easier. And God will give you a desire to want to read more. And the more you pray and the more you read, the deeper your relationship with him. And that's the main thing, is to get the relationship with him. It's really the best investment you could ever make. I mentioned my father at the beginning of this talk. He was my hero. And unashamedly, he was a hard man, a heavy drinker, came from a very dysfunctional background, crude, vulgar, violent at times. And we never really got on. And like I said, at 16, we had a fight and I left home. And I never really saw him again for many, many years. When I became a Christian, I wanted to see him again. My heart had softened and I'd changed. And I went to see my dad. And you know what? He hadn't changed at all. He'd got more difficult. He was drinking harder. He was just more vulgar. And it was just a nightmare. And I'd try with my father. And I would buy him train tickets. He lived in Manchester. And I would invite him down to London. I'd send him the tickets. I'd go and meet him at Euston Station. And as soon as I'd get him there and he'd get off the train, he would start complaining straight away. He'd have had a few beers on the train, so he was a bit wobbly when he got off. And then he would start digging me out. You know, he started digging me out about money, about traveling, about he was tired, about I had everything and he had nothing. And the main thing he'd whinge about is he always wanted to travel first class. You never send me first class tickets, do you, son? But never mind, let's go. Where's the pub? That's what I'd get off him. Every single time I would meet him. And this went on for months and months. I'd buy him the tickets, send him up, meet him, slightly drunk, off the train, whinging about money, first class thing. And I got really fed up of it. And he'd come and stay in the house, and it would be hell, actually. My daughter was a lot younger then, Phoebe, and she never really had a granddad. And she would take him sort of toast on a plate and try and have a cup of tea with him. And he'd make her stand there, and I'd watch from the sidelines. And he'd ignore her, and it would drive me mad, absolutely mad, because that's the way he was. And I said to Amanda, do you know what, I can't do this. Christian, I've failed. I just can't do my dad anymore. Amanda said to me, you need to pray, which I did not want to hear. And then she said, you need to read the Bible more. Maybe God will speak to you. Yeah, maybe he will. And as I said, as he came down, it would be hard, and I'd pray and I'd read the Bible, and it didn't get easier, to be honest. It still got quite hard work. And then he came down one day, and one weekend, and it got so bad. He was so negative. And I was scared that I might do something. I walked out the house. I had my Bible, a little Bible in my pocket, and I went for a walk, and I sat in the park, and I tried to pray. I wanted a relationship with my dad, and I just couldn't get it. And as I was reading the Bible, why, I don't know, but I fell into the Old Testament. I like the Old Testament. And I fell into the Ten Commandments. And as I was going down the Ten Commandments, why I was reading them, I have no idea. One of them really stood out in sort of bold. And it was a bit where it says, honor your mother and father. And I thought, oh, come on. That's not the scripture I want to hear. You know, I had trouble living with them, never mind honoring them. And it just kept coming out saying, honor your mother and father. Not an easy scripture for me. So I tried with him, and it did start to get better. He didn't. I got more resilient. The things he said and the words weren't as cutting. They didn't hurt as much. And some of his actions I just let pass by and I moved on with him. And it got easier with him. One weekend when he came down to stay with us and he was going back, we'd had an interesting weekend. It had not been so bad, and I was taking him back to Euston Station. And as I put him on the train with Amanda and Phoebe, and we sat him down, and Amanda was making sure he had all his stuff and everything, I had this weird feeling come over me. It was an unexplainable love for my father as I looked at him sat in that seat. And I welled up. And it came into my head, I'm going to buy him a first-class ticket. So I ran up and down the train like a lunatic trying to find the guard to get that extra bit of money you can pay to upgrade it, and I couldn't. So I ran off the train and I bought a very expensive single first-class ticket back to Manchester. And I ran back on the train. Amanda and Phoebe was in a bit of a shock. I grabbed my dad and I picked him up and he went, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I grabbed him and I walked him into the first-class compartment and I sat him down. And then I had to jump off the train. We all had to, because the whistle went and we had to get off. And I stood on the platform through the window and I looked at my father. And it was brilliant. He got into his leather chair and he hit the recline button and it kind of went back like this. Then he took his trilby off and he put his trilby on the table. Then he got his paper out and started reading his paper. And then he put that down and went like this. And someone brought him a cup of tea and a biscuit. And I remember him turning as it was pulling out. As it turned out, I saw him look at me. And he had the biggest smile on his face, like Christmas, birthdays, the whole lot had come at once. And the train pulled out of the station. Amanda said to me, "What on earth is going on with you? What are you doing?" I said, "You know what? I have absolutely no idea. I just wanted to see my dad happy. I wanted to see him smile and enjoy himself." 3 weeks later, after that incident, my father died on his own of a massive heart attack. Now, was that God helping me be at peace with my father, or was it me just making up that I wanted to buy a ticket? All those years with my dad, all those memories, which you can imagine weren't brilliant, all I have of my father now is that picture of him with that face looking through that window with such a happy look on his face. God doesn't want to cohere us. God doesn't want to sort of beat us with a stick. He wants to walk with us. He wants to have this relationship with us. And the way he does that is through this book. As we read the narratives of Jesus and what he did, we start to develop that relationship with him. And the more we read it, all I can say is the more exciting it gets, and the more of a relationship you develop, and the more you fall in love with God. Amen.